Hello and welcome to another excellent model railroading tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how I built this intricate model of a model railroad which helped my client visualize every little detail of the track plan and complex benchwork even before he bought a single piece of plywood. With a model like this, you can pretty much walk around your model railroad long before you start building it, giving you the opportunities to not only visualize the finished project, but also to identify potential problems and practical complexities which might be critical for your success. It starts with the room, surveying the position of doors, windows, and other fixed items that cannot be moved. Fortunately, this room was absolutely clear and square, letting me start with a blank canvas. I took the room's dimensions and made a simple floor plan in AnyRail, the software I use for track planning. This is not an AnyRail or track planning tutorial, but I will touch upon some basics. But before I do that, here is a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon if you haven't done it already. This layout is designed in HO scale and I build the track plan in layers. The layout that I designed was fairly complex with 3 distinct levels connected by 2 separate helices. I built each level in a separate layer, and within a level I segregated different elements in more layers, one for track, one for benchwork, one for building and such. Each of the helices were drawn in their own separate layers too. This semi-permanent layout will have to have options to be relocated if there is a need. So I had to incorporate a sectional design within this complex structure. The client also wanted a walk-in design, so I added a lift-up section. The layers not only help me pick and choose different elements while designing the track plan and the layout, it also lets me examine each element in 3D view and check if the elevation and clearances are uniform or not. Once the track plan was complete, I took a print of each of the layers in 1:15 scale and pasted them on 1mm mount board. 1mm thick mount board in this scale somewhat corresponds to 16mm ply in the real world, which I feel is perfect for this project. The helix was the interesting one. I forgot to mark the center of the circle while printing, but it is fairly simple to find 2 diagonal reference of track joints and extend it to the other side and find the center. Then I used my circular cutter to cut out the pieces. A quick tip here. When cutting concentric circles from one piece of board using a compass cutter, start from the outermost. Once you cut out the innermost circle, you lose the center. I used 5mm spacers for the helix construction, which corresponds to 75mm in the real world. Now this layout is designed in HO scale, so yes, 75mm is not really a lot of clearance, but it keeps the gradient less than 3% in this case and will handle most standard HO scale locos and rolling stock, so it is a decent compromise. Moreover, 16mm boards will be an overkill for the helix in the real life, and an 8mm hardboard will be a more likely choice, providing a slightly more headroom. You know that you're doing it right when the gradient in your scale model of a model railroad comes pretty close to your design. Just like it is in the real life, the connections between the modules were the tricky bit. Here I'm finding out the right orientation of the ramp that connects the helix and the level 2 center module. While gluing the ramp, I used my parallel edge and the cutting mat matrix to keep the level 1 and level 2 modules as aligned as possible to ensure the tracks meet at the joint. At this stage, I realized an issue in the design. The cut between the 2 modules fall exactly on top of the last turn of the helix. That makes it impossible to build an end support and connection mechanism without fouling the helix track. So I decided to move the joint a bit toward the other side, clearing the helix. I cut the bigger module, avoiding the approach of any turnout, and joined the piece with the turntable module using glue and a thin sheet of cardboard. It's a good time to run a mock-up with the rest of the setup. As you might have gathered by now, the level 1 of this layout has already been built using the same methods. So let me give you an overview. First, I had built a mock-up of the room in the same scale and drew the doors and windows for a more complete look and leaving nothing for imagination. Then I built the staging level first, which is 12 inches below level 1, and built a helix to connect the two sections, much like how you saw me do it to connect level 1 and level 2. As you can see, I did have some curious visitors and some occasional helpers throughout the build. The Y section and the station and the junction has some elaborate joints, which is something that the client has to put some dedicated focus on during the building phase. The staging plus lower helix section sits on a complex benchwork that creates the foundation of this section of the layout, and I reckon that building this part in real life will be the biggest challenge in the benchwork stage. As it happens in real life, individually the pieces might work out just fine, but when all are connected together, there is always going to be some little bump. Here, I need to push the module a bit inside to meet the wall, but that essentially makes it out of alignment with the ramp joint. It's not the end of the world, and it can be easily fixed in the real world by reorienting the track to meet the module. Remember that while building the layout, you'd most likely lay these joining tracks only when all modules are aligned and fixed in place, and then cut at the joint to get a reliable connection. It's time to build the structure around these modules. 2 mm thick lollipop sticks cut to size were used for scale lumber. First thing to handle were the section joints, starting with the turntable module. I cut the end pieces for the two adjacent modules first. Then I drilled aligning holes and pushed a couple of toothpick ends through. Once the end pieces were aligned through the pins, I lined up the two boards, ensuring that the tracks are aligned too. Then I glued them to the joining boards and clamped them till the glue cures. You need to be careful though that you don't accidentally glue the boards, the alignment pins, or the end boards to each other in the process. I added a couple of supporting blocks for each of the end boards and continued with the rest of the beams. The longitudinal beams at the straight edge of the wall would require a couple of grooves so that the wall brackets can slot in. I used my Revell miniature saw to cut the grooves, making sure that the brackets don't foul any turnouts and can be used as a template for the real brackets while building the layout. For the small industry spar behind the turntable, I used a 5 mm piece of lumber to elevate that section, which clears the helix track underneath. However, the large internal section still needed some support while allowing removal of the section as and when required. For the large turntable portion of the board, I decided to build leg supports that go all the way to the top of the level 1 baseboard inside the helix. I had to be careful that none of the legs or support beams either foul the hidden staging below the helix or the hole that is required to place the turntable. Notice that I marked the turntable position on the inside of the board too. The last item to complete are the brackets. I cut and labeled them for their specific positions, marked out their locations on the wall, and cut out the holes. The foam core wall was easy to cut, and I had to make sure that the brackets fit tightly. When everything seemed to be aligning properly, I glued the support blocks and the brackets, making sure that the brackets are all square with the wall. Now, I would leave the model as is since it is meant to be a reference mostly for the benchwork to reveal its complexity, but for the simpler modules, I did add fascia from thin cardboards to give it a finished appearance. This model of a model is like a small puzzle to solve a bigger puzzle. You can pick up and inspect each section in minute detail, point out problem areas, derive real dimensions, and estimate with precision the amount of lumber and boards that you require for the project. Ability to inspect exactly how things will look when built can be a great advantage for complex layout designs. And to me personally, it makes a lot of difference if it is done in real 3 dimensions right in front of your eyes rather than in a 3D computer model. I'm a model maker after all. Will you go through all this trouble to plan your next model train layout? Do you think that this level of planning is an overkill, or is this the key to success? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button and check out my model railroading playlist for some unique content. Until next time, have fun playing with your model trains.